Welcome to History Teller YT. Today we're diving into one of the most powerful cultural shifts in American history, the Harlem Renaissance. This is the story of how a neighborhood became a movement, and how a movement reshaped identity, creativity, and the future of black culture across the world. The moment you step into this history, you feel the energy of jazz echoing through packed clubs. You see writers sharpening their voices, artists redefining beauty, and families rebuilding their lives in a city that pushed them and inspired them at the same time. This journey takes you through music that changed global rhythms, poetry that spoke with raw honesty, political ideas that challenged injustice, and the incredible migration that carried millions toward a new beginning. You'll hear about thinkers who reimagined identity, women who stepped into leadership, businesses that held the community together, and the struggles that shaped daily life behind the scenes. If you listen closely, you'll feel the heartbeat of Harlem. Young people searching for expression, elders holding on to tradition, and a community rising through art even when the odds were heavy. This is not just a chapter of history. It's a blueprint for how creativity, pride, and resilience can transform ordinary streets into a global symbol of possibility. Get ready, because once this story begins, you'll want to hear every part of it. The early 20th century reshaped the lives of millions of African Americans as they left the rural South in search of safety, dignity, and economic opportunity. This movement, known as the Great Migration, set the stage for everything the Harlem Renaissance would become. People left behind landscapes marked by tenant farming, racial violence, and limited schooling. They boarded crowded trains heading to northern cities that promised jobs in factories, railroads, and service industries. Although segregation and discrimination followed them north, the relative freedom and higher wages gave families a chance to redefine themselves. Harlem emerged as one of the major destinations. Landlords and real estate developers had overbuilt during a housing boom, and when white residents began leaving the area, black migrants took the chance to claim those apartments and brownstones. As thousands arrived, Harlem turned into a concentrated center of creativity, activism, and ambition. It became a neighborhood where ideas traveled quickly, where musicians could find eager audiences, and where writers could share stories grounded in their lived experience. By the 1920s, Harlem was no longer just a neighborhood. It functioned like a cultural capital, drawing people with talent, curiosity, and drive. Churches, newspapers, nightclubs, and literary circles all bloomed within a few blocks of one another. Many residents were first-generation Northerners, excited by the sense of momentum and possibility. Community leaders built institutions that encouraged learning and self-expression, including social clubs, reading groups, and political organizations. Middle-class black families supported the arts, invested in education, and pushed for a modern identity rooted in pride rather than survival. Harlem streets buzzed with a mix of Caribbean immigrants, Southern migrants, college-educated professionals, and blue-collar workers. The diversity of voices created room for experimentation. It was not unusual to find a jazz rehearsal happening above a beauty salon or a poet reciting new lines inside a small bookstore. The density of creativity made Harlem feel alive at all hours. This energy shaped the Renaissance long before its artists gained national attention. Intellectual circles developed quickly as black scholars, teachers, and writers sought ways to redefine how African American history and identity were understood. Magazines, such as The Crisis and Opportunity, provided platforms for new authors and championed social change. Writers discussed how to challenge racist portrayals that had dominated American culture. They wanted literature that reflected the real complexity of black life. College campuses and local organizations hosted debates on politics, heritage, and the future of the community. Thinkers like W.E.B. Du Bois urged artists to treat their work as a tool for racial uplift, while younger voices pushed for creative independence. These differences sparked important discussions and opened space for innovation. The networks that formed in Harlem created the supportive environment artists needed to grow. Friendships and rivalries fueled ambition. Editors discovered poets. Musicians connected with writers. Ideas flowed freely. And from that exchange came the foundation of a movement that transformed American culture. When jazz reached New York, it carried the heartbeat of New Orleans with it. The style traveled north with musicians who had honed their sound in marching bands, riverboats, and dance halls. In Harlem, jazz found a home that encouraged innovation. The city's crowded clubs and cabarets allowed musicians to test new ideas every night. Improvisation became the soul of the music, and audiences embraced its spontaneity. The syncopated rhythms and expressive solos offered a sense of freedom that resonated deeply with people who had lived through generations of constraint. Jazz represented movement, confidence, and adaptability. It broke rules and invited emotion. Performers blended blues, ragtime, and spirituals into a sound that felt both modern and rooted in tradition. As word of Harlem's nightlife spread, visitors from across the city came to experience this growing scene. The music became an essential part of the Renaissance, shaping how the world understood African American creativity. Louis Armstrong became one of the most influential figures of the era. His arrival in New York in the mid-1920s marked a turning point for jazz. Armstrong brought technical skill, emotional depth, and a style that encouraged other musicians to push their boundaries. His solos showed that jazz could be both playful and profound. Audiences responded to his charisma and his ability to make every performance feel personal. Armstrong's recordings reached listeners far beyond Harlem and introduced the country to a new vision of black musical excellence. He helped shift jazz from ensemble-focused group playing toward a style centered on individual expression. This change inspired singers, writers, and dancers across Harlem, who saw parallels between Armstrong's musical approach and their own artistic goals. His success demonstrated that black artists could shape mainstream American culture while staying true to their roots. Harlem's nightlife offered more than entertainment. It became a meeting point for people from different social and racial backgrounds. Clubs like the Cotton Club and the Savoy Ballroom gained national reputations. Touring celebrities, politicians, and socialites traveled uptown to experience the music and energy. Although segregation shaped who could enter certain spaces, the performances themselves allowed for forms of cultural exchange that did not exist elsewhere in the United States. Dancers learned new steps. Composers heard new melodies. White patrons encountered African American culture in ways that challenged stereotypes. The nightclub scene supported countless musicians who relied on steady gigs to refine their sound. It also gave artists a platform to influence trends across the country. The rhythms that filled Harlem's clubs spread into theaters, radio shows, and early films. Those sounds made the Harlem Renaissance impossible to ignore. Writers in Harlem wanted more than artistic recognition. They hoped to redefine what it meant to be a black author in America. Earlier literature had often been shaped by the expectations of white publishers who preferred sentimental or simplified portrayals of black life. The new generation rejected those limits. They insisted on writing with honesty, confidence, and cultural pride. Their poems explored everyday struggles as well as moments of joy, love, humor, and resilience. They experimented with structure, rhythm, and language, drawing from spirituals, folk tales, and the pulse of the city. Harlem's poets viewed writing as a form of testimony. They wanted readers to understand the interior lives of African Americans, not the caricatures that had dominated public imagination. Their work captured the tension between hope and hardship, showing a community in motion and refusing to be defined by anything except its own voice. Langston Hughes became the defining poet of the Harlem Renaissance because he understood how to blend artistry with lived experience. He wrote in a clear, musical style that welcomed readers rather than distancing them. Hughes believed that poetry should reflect the life of ordinary people, whether they worked in kitchens, factories, or nightclubs. His lines carried the rhythms of jazz and blues, turning the poetry page into a stage. He celebrated black culture with warmth and honesty, while also addressing inequality and fatigue. Hughes traveled widely, met people from many backgrounds, and brought those experiences into his work. His poems reached readers beyond Harlem and helped shape a national understanding of African American identity. He proved that literature rooted in specific communities could resonate across the country. His influence encouraged other writers to trust their own voices and embrace the full range of their experiences. The Harlem Renaissance thrived because writers supported one another. Literary salons became places where new poems were read aloud, critiques were offered, and ideas were exchanged. These gatherings often took place in apartments, bookstores, or small community centers. Established authors mentored newcomers. Editors discovered emerging voices. Politicians and activists joined discussions about how art could inspire social change. The salon strengthened friendships and encouraged creative risk-taking. Writers heard feedback that pushed them to revise and improve their work. Collaboration became part of the movement's identity. No single poet defined the era. Instead, the collective energy of many voices shaped the Renaissance. These connections helped transform Harlem into a workshop of ideas, where literature felt like both a personal craft and a shared cultural mission. Visual artists of the Harlem Renaissance pushed forward a bold reimagining of how African American life could appear on canvas and in sculpture. For decades, mainstream galleries had excluded black artists or pressured them to create work that fit narrow assumptions. The new generation refused these limits. They wanted art that reflected the depth, dignity, and variety of their communities. Many of them had trained at prestigious art schools, but had struggled to find platforms for their work. Harlem offered something different. It gave them access to a lively environment filled with musicians, poets, dancers, and activists. Painters began exploring themes drawn from African heritage, urban landscapes, and the social struggles shaping daily experience. Their work expanded beyond portraits to include abstract forms, cultural symbolism, and scenes of city life. These artists handled color, light, and movement in ways that captured the complexity of the moment. They experimented constantly, blending influences from European modernism with visual languages rooted in Black history. This generation did not view art as a luxury. They saw it as a statement of presence, a declaration that their creative perspectives deserved recognition. Their work also served as a bridge for viewers who wanted to understand the Renaissance through a visual lens. Every brushstroke became part of a larger cultural conversation that was unfolding across Harlem. Aaron Douglas became one of the central figures of the Harlem Renaissance because he introduced a visual style that looked ahead while reaching back to ancestral memory. His art combined silhouetted figures, geometric shapes, and layered scenes that suggested both movement and time. Douglas studied traditional African art and incorporated its forms into his modern compositions. His murals often depicted themes of liberation, progress and intellectual awakening. They showed enslaved people breaking their chains, workers lifting tools toward the sky, and scholars reaching forward through expanding rays of light. The message in his art resonated deeply with a community searching for identity and direction in a rapidly changing world. Douglas believed visual art could shape collective consciousness. He wanted his murals to speak to people who might never pick up a novel or attend a poetry reading. His work appeared in schools, libraries, and institutions across the country, allowing the Harlem Renaissance to leave a mark far beyond New York. Douglas created a style that became symbolic of the era's confidence. His pieces encouraged African American audiences to see themselves as part of a long historical arc filled with strength and cultural richness. He offered an artistic vision where beauty, history, and hope could coexist, and that vision became one of the enduring visual signatures of the movement. The growth of Harlem's visual art scene depended not only on the artists, but also on the galleries, patrons, and community organizers who helped them reach the public. Small exhibition spaces opened in churches, libraries, and social organizations. These venues provided critical opportunities for emerging artists to display work that mainstream institutions ignored. Wealthy patrons, including some progressive white supporters, purchased paintings and funded exhibitions, though their involvement sometimes brought tension. Artists debated whether financial support might influence the subjects they chose or shape how their communities were represented. Still, the support played a role in helping painters survive in a competitive city. Local leaders also organized traveling exhibitions that allowed Harlem artists to showcase their work across the United States. These efforts helped spread the influence of the Renaissance, proving that African American art belonged in national conversations about creativity and modernity. Representation remained a struggle, but Harlem artists continued to push forward with conviction. They believed that visibility was not a favor, but a right. Their persistence forced broader recognition from institutions that had long ignored them. Over time, their exhibitions grew more ambitious, their audiences widened, and their impact deepened. Through their determination, they helped establish a foundation for future generations of black artists to enter museums and galleries with far greater freedom. The rise of theater during the Harlem Renaissance offered a new way for African Americans to challenge old narratives and present characters shaped by realism rather than stereotype. Before the 1920s, most roles available to black performers were limited, often written by white playwrights and designed to reinforce prejudiced expectations. Harlem changed this pattern by providing a landscape where writers, directors, and actors could collaborate freely. Community theaters, youth groups, and small stages appeared throughout the neighborhood. These spaces welcomed experimentation and encouraged performers to explore themes that had been ignored in mainstream productions. Audiences responded with enthusiasm because they saw their own lives reflected on the stage with depth and honesty. Plays examined family tensions, migration stories, romantic struggles, and the pressures of urban life. They also portrayed humor and resilience, creating a balanced view of daily experience. Theater became a powerful tool for self-definition, giving the community a chance to see itself not through the lens of outsiders, but through the eyes of its own storytellers. As more people attended performances, theater groups expanded, and playwrights felt increasingly confident in producing work that challenged social norms. This growth helped reshape American theater by pushing for inclusion and encouraging greater respect for African American artistic voices. The Lafayette Players became one of the most influential acting companies of the era, setting high standards for professionalism, discipline, and artistic excellence. Founded earlier in the century, but gaining major momentum during the Renaissance, The group trained actors who sought substantial roles that required range, emotional depth, and strong technique. They produced both classic European plays and new works by African American playwrights. The company demonstrated that black performers could excel in dramatic material often assumed to be beyond their reach. Their productions attracted diverse audiences and inspired younger actors who dreamed of careers on stage. The Lafayette Players also traveled, bringing Harlem's artistic energy to cities across the United States. Their success challenged the exclusionary practices of mainstream theater companies that refused to cast black actors in anything other than minor or caricatured roles. The Players insisted on being taken seriously, and their commitment influenced casting directors, educators, and critics. Their members later moved into radio, film, and larger theater circuits, spreading the Renaissance's impact even further. They proved that the stage could be a place where African American performers shaped narratives with authority and creativity. Their work helped pave the way for future generations of black actors who would eventually take center stage on Broadway and beyond. Playwrights of the Harlem Renaissance used the stage to explore questions that reached far beyond entertainment. They confronted racism, colorism, gender expectations, and the pressures placed on families trying to navigate a changing society. Writers such as Willis Richardson, Marita Bonner, and Georgia Douglas Johnson developed scripts that dealt with difficult emotions and complex moral choices. Their characters struggled with decisions shaped by economic hardship, migration, and discrimination. Instead of presenting simple heroes and villains, these playwrights offered layered stories that demanded empathy from the audience. Many plays examined the internal conflicts faced by people attempting to balance ambition with the realities of systemic inequality. Others explored generational differences within families adjusting to life in northern cities after leaving the rural South. Theater groups in Harlem embraced such work because it reflected conversations already happening in the community. These plays encouraged audiences to think critically and discuss the issues after the curtain fell. They helped establish drama as a thoughtful and socially engaged art form. The playwrights of this era contributed significantly to American theater by expanding its themes and insisting that black lives offered material rich with emotional and intellectual depth. Their achievements laid the groundwork for later dramatists who continued to use the stage as a place to examine the nation's conscience. Political activism became one of the driving forces behind the Harlem Renaissance because the cultural awakening did not happen in isolation. The same people who filled clubs with jazz and poetry were struggling against discrimination in housing, jobs, and education. Community leaders recognized that artistic expression could not flourish without social progress. So they organized voter education programs, legal aid networks, and neighborhood associations. Churches and civic groups played important roles as meeting points where residents gathered to discuss strategies for confronting unfair laws and workplace violations. Activists pushed to end police brutality, which had a severe impact on black communities in northern cities despite promises of freedom and opportunity. They raised funds to support local families, created youth programs to keep children engaged in positive activities, and worked to protect newcomers from the exploitation they often faced in unfamiliar urban environments. Harlem developed a reputation as a political stronghold, where discussions about justice and equality were part of everyday life. Community members believed change required both artistic confidence and direct action. Their activism created a social foundation that strengthened the Renaissance, giving artists the courage to speak openly about injustice and inspiring residents to challenge the systems that limited their progress. This mixture of political energy and cultural pride made Harlem feel like a place where transformation was possible. Newspapers and magazines shaped the Renaissance by becoming platforms for rigorous political debate. Publications such as The Crisis and Opportunity played a central role in informing readers about national issues that affected the African American community. They reported on voting rights, school segregation, housing discrimination, and the growing threats of racial violence. These publications also highlighted achievements in education, business, and the arts, creating a more balanced image of Black life than mainstream papers offered. Their editors believed journalism should challenge misinformation and celebrate progress at the same time. They encouraged readers to stay politically active and to understand how laws and policies shape their futures. Letters to the editor, opinion pieces, and investigative reports helped create a culture of critical thinking within Harlem. People debated articles in barbershops, churches, and social clubs. These discussions strengthened community awareness and motivated residents to join campaigns for justice. Black journalism also provided exposure for young writers who wanted to combine art with activism. Many poets and essayists published early work in these magazines, blending storytelling with pointed commentary. The consistency of political reporting helped keep civil rights issues at the center of public attention. Journalism became a bridge between everyday citizens and national conversations, allowing Harlem's concerns to reach audiences far beyond New York. Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, played a major part in shaping political thought during the Harlem Renaissance. Garvey promoted a vision of global Black unity that challenged the limitations African Americans faced in the United States. His message encouraged pride in African heritage, economic self-reliance, and collective strength. The UNI organized parades, conventions, and businesses aimed at building economic independence. Garvey believed financial power was essential for true freedom, and he urged Black communities worldwide to support one another. His speeches attracted large audiences who felt inspired by the idea that their future did not depend solely on acceptance from white society. Instead, he offered a model of empowerment rooted in self-direction and cultural connection. Although Garvey's ideas differed from those of other leaders, his influence added important depth to the political environment in Harlem. He encouraged people to imagine themselves as part of a global community linked by history and shared struggle. His presence sparked debate among intellectuals, activists, and artists, many of whom incorporated themes of pride, unity, and liberation into their work. The conversations he initiated helped broaden the Renaissance beyond local concerns and push people to consider how identity and freedom could operate on an international scale. His movement added to the era's sense of purpose and ambition, giving Harlem residents a wider horizon to look toward. Black women played a central role in the Harlem Renaissance, even though historical accounts often gave them less attention than they deserved. Their presence shaped political discussions, artistic experimentation, and community development. Many had come from the South during the Great Migration, seeking a life that allowed more freedom and more opportunity for personal expression. Harlem gave them a platform to participate in organizations, teach in local schools, create literary circles, and pursue careers previously closed to them. They organized community events, hosted salons, wrote for newspapers, and joined social welfare groups designed to support families struggling with overcrowded housing, low wages, or discrimination. Their leadership extended beyond artistic contributions. They became organizers, lecturers, and advocates who understood that cultural change required social change as well. Black women challenged expectations placed on them by both white society and members of their own community. They argued that progress could not occur without acknowledging the barriers faced by women who worked long hours while also trying to write, perform, or attend school. Many balanced motherhood with civic engagement, all while pushing for greater educational access and political representation. Their voices added necessary perspectives to the Renaissance, making its visions of liberation more complete. Without their persistence, the movement would have lacked much of its depth and humanity. Zora Neale Hurston became one of the most distinctive and influential figures of the Harlem Renaissance because she approached storytelling with an anthropologist's curiosity and a writer's instinct for rhythm. Hurston traveled throughout the South, gathering folk tales, songs, and oral histories that capture traditions often ignored by scholars. She believed these stories deserve the same respect as classical literature. Her work preserved a sense of cultural memory that connected black communities in Harlem to the roots they had carried from the rural South. Hurston's writing blended humor, language play, and emotional insight. She embraced dialect not as a limitation, but as a vibrant reflection of lived experience. Her novels and essays showed the depth of rural black life without romanticizing or simplifying it. In Harlem, she participated in debates about how African American stories should be told. While some critics wanted literature to focus on respectability and uplift, Hurston insisted on authenticity, even when it meant portraying flawed characters and complicated relationships. Her confidence and individuality challenged narrow expectations placed on black authors, especially women. She built friendships with other writers, joined literary groups, and contributed to journals that supported creative independence. Over time, her work influenced generations of authors who admired her commitment to cultural truth and her ability to blend scholarship with artistic expression. Hurston's legacy stands as one of the most durable contributions of the era. Women's clubs became essential engines of community structure during the Harlem Renaissance. These organizations supported education, health initiatives, childcare programs, and housing assistance. They provided safe spaces where women could strategize about political issues, discuss cultural events, and support one another's ambitions. Clubs raised funds for libraries, scholarship programs, and youth centers that gave children a place to learn and socialize after school. They hosted lectures, debates, and public readings that expanded cultural awareness throughout Harlem. Their influence reached families who might not have attended art exhibitions or literary salons, but still wanted opportunities for their children to grow. These clubs also acted as intermediaries between local government and the neighborhood, advocating for improved public services and fair treatment. Their members understood how structural inequality shaped daily life, so they worked to address both individual needs and broader societal problems. Women who participated in these networks often held multiple roles in the community. They might spend the morning at a club meeting, the afternoon at work, and the evening organizing a cultural program or political rally. Their commitment strengthened social bonds and made Harlem's progress possible. Through persistence, compassion, and organization, these women helped sustain the Renaissance from the ground up. Their work created a sense of stability that allowed artists to flourish and families to find support during challenging times. Education became one of the most powerful forces shaping Harlem during the Renaissance. Families who had left the South carried with them a strong belief that learning could open doors that had been shut for generations. In Harlem, parents encouraged their children to attend school regularly, join reading circles, and explore subjects that they had never been allowed to study in earlier years. Teachers played a crucial role in this transformation. Many were highly trained graduates from historically black colleges, and they approached their classrooms with a sense of mission. They viewed education not just as a transfer of facts, but as a way to cultivate pride, ambition, and confidence in young people still learning to navigate a world marked by discrimination. Schools became gathering places where students were exposed to music, literature, drama, and visual art. They also served as centers for community engagement, offering evening classes for adults who wanted to improve their reading, business skills, and job prospects. Some schools opened their buildings for neighborhood meetings and cultural events, building a connection between youth education and community improvement. This environment strengthened the cultural foundations of the Harlem Renaissance because it allowed children and adults to participate in the movement's intellectual life. The investment in learning signaled that Harlem was not only a place for artistic expression, but also a place committed to building a more informed and capable generation. The rise of theater during the Harlem Renaissance offered a new way for African Americans to challenge old narratives and present characters shaped by realism rather than stereotype. Before the 1920s, most roles available to black performers were limited, often written by white playwrights and designed to reinforce prejudiced expectations. Harlem changed this pattern by providing a landscape where writers, directors, and actors could collaborate freely. Community theaters, youth groups, and small stages appeared throughout the neighborhood. These spaces welcomed experimentation and encouraged performers to explore themes that had been ignored in mainstream productions. Audiences responded with enthusiasm because they saw their own lives reflected on the stage with depth and honesty. Plays examined family tensions, migration stories, romantic struggles, and the pressures of urban life. They also portrayed humor and resilience, creating a balanced view of daily experience. Theater became a powerful tool for self-definition, giving the community a chance to see itself not through the lens of outsiders, but through the eyes of its own storytellers. As more people attended performances, theater groups expanded, and playwrights felt increasingly confident in producing work that challenged social norms. This growth helped reshape American theater by pushing for inclusion and encouraging greater respect for African American artistic voices. The Harlem Renaissance produced a wave of scholars who reshaped conversations about history, sociology, and culture. Many had earned advanced degrees despite limited access to universities and funding. They entered their fields determined to correct misconceptions that had shaped public understanding of African American life. Their research challenged narratives that ignored black contributions or described black communities through racist assumptions. These scholars applied rigorous methodology to document achievements in science, literature, business, and political organization. They produced studies that examine labor conditions, housing patterns, migration history, and voting rights. Their work gained national attention because it provided factual evidence that countered harmful stereotypes. Academic journals, conferences, and public lectures gave scholars platforms to share their findings with a wider audience. Some became professors who influenced younger generations by showing that intellectual excellence belonged to everyone who worked for it. Their writing often aligned with the artistic goals of the Renaissance. While poets and musicians expressed emotional truths, scholars presented historical and sociological truths that helped explain the broader context of Black life in America. This combination strengthened the movement by grounding its cultural achievements in research and analysis. The scholars of Harlem expanded the intellectual landscape of the time, insisting that African American history deserved serious study and acknowledgement within the country's academic institutions. Libraries became vital institutions during the Harlem Renaissance because they offered free access to books, newspapers, and educational programs at a time when most families could not afford to buy these materials. The 135th Street Branch Library became the intellectual center of Harlem. It hosted lectures, forums, exhibitions, and reading clubs that welcomed both adults and children. Librarians recognized the importance of creating a space where African American history and culture were treated with respect. They curated collections that included works by Black authors, rare historical documents, and contemporary scholarship. This environment encouraged visitors to spend long hours reading, writing, and discussing ideas. Many future writers and scholars first discovered their interests in these reading rooms. The library also employed pioneering figures who saw the value of collecting and preserving materials about Black life. They worked to establish archives that documented achievements, struggles, and cultural developments. These collections became essential resources for researchers who wanted accurate information about African American experiences. Beyond its scholarly significance, the library served as a safe, quiet place in a busy neighborhood where people could explore new possibilities through books. It helped strengthen the intellectual character of the Harlem Renaissance by making knowledge accessible to everyone, regardless of age, income, or background. The library played a silent but powerful role in shaping a community that valued both creativity and learning. The Great Migration brought hundreds of thousands of African Americans into northern cities, and Harlem became one of the most concentrated examples of this demographic shift. The move offered hope, but it also brought a set of challenges that families had to face almost immediately. Many newcomers arrived with limited savings, and finding steady work could take time. Harlem streets were loud, busy, and competitive, a stark contrast to the slower pace of rural southern towns. Apartments were often crowded because landlords took advantage of the housing shortage by raising rents far beyond what many families could reasonably afford. Despite these difficulties, the sense of possibility remained strong. People built networks by connecting with neighbors, churches, and local businesses. These relationships became essential for emotional support and practical survival. The daily routines of urban life required learning how to navigate public transportation, industrial work schedules, and unfamiliar cultural expectations. For many, this adjustment represented both the excitement of independence and the stress of constant change. Children adapted more quickly, absorbing the rhythms of the city and shaping a new generation with different expectations and ambitions. While older migrants carried memories of rural landscapes, younger ones associated their identity with Harlem's blocks, shops, music, and nightlife. This mixture of experiences shaped the complex character of the community and influenced the Renaissance by giving artists a wide range of stories to explore. Housing conditions in Harlem became one of the most urgent issues facing residents. As the population rose, once spacious apartments were divided into smaller units, sometimes with several families sharing a single kitchen or bathroom. Landlords recognized the desperation for housing and charged inflated rents that exceeded the actual quality of the buildings. Poor ventilation, faulty plumbing, and limited access to sunlight were common problems. Yet people accepted these conditions because they believed Harlem offered more opportunity and safety than the South. Activists, community leaders, and journalists began documenting these problems to encourage reforms. They argued that stable housing was essential for progress, education, and health. Overcrowding also affected public services. Schools struggled with limited classroom space, and streets became more congested as businesses expanded in response to the growing population. Still, the neighborhood's challenges did not overshadow its spirit. Residents responded by creating mutual aid systems, organizing tenant groups, and developing housing cooperatives that aimed to provide better living conditions. Churches ran outreach programs, Local charities offered support for families trying to pay rent or secure repairs. These collective efforts created a sense of solidarity that strengthened the community during turbulent times. The struggle for stable housing became part of the broader story of the Harlem Renaissance because it shaped the daily lives of artists, workers, and students. Their creativity emerged despite these difficulties, making the achievements of the era even more remarkable. Work opportunities in the North were more plentiful than in the South, but they still came with limitations. Many industries refused to hire black workers for skilled positions, restricting them to the lowest, paying jobs in factories, service work, or manual labor. Women often found employment as domestic workers, laundresses, or clerks, while men worked in warehouses, railroads, kitchens, or construction. Even with these constraints, wages were generally higher than those available in Southern agriculture, giving families a chance to save money, support relatives, or invest in education. Labor conflicts became part of life as workers demanded fair treatment, safer conditions, and equal pay. Some unions admitted black workers, but many excluded them, forcing employees to form their own labor organizations. These efforts built a sense of unity and pushed back against discriminatory hiring practices. Economic life in Harlem was also shaped by black-owned businesses. Barbershops, beauty salons, grocery stores, cafes, and newspapers created a local economy fueled by community support. These businesses became safe spaces where people exchanged news, discussed politics, and debated ideas. They helped stabilize the neighborhood and provided employment for residents who faced barriers elsewhere. The economic struggle of Harlem shaped the tone of the Renaissance. Writers, musicians, and painters often drew inspiration from the tension between ambition and hardship. Their work reflected the determination of people who fought every day for dignity and opportunity in a society that offered both freedom and inequality. Churches played one of the most influential roles in shaping Harlem's social structure during the Renaissance. For many families who had migrated from the South, the church had long provided stability, guidance, and emotional strength. When they arrived in Harlem, they sought similar spaces where they could gather, worship, and rebuild a sense of community. Congregations grew quickly, and churches expanded their missions beyond Sunday services. They offered shelter, tutoring programs, charity drives, youth activities, and job placement assistance. Ministers became respected public figures whose voices carried weight in political debates and neighborhood decisions. Churches also provided emotional safety at a time when racial discrimination and economic hardship placed enormous pressure on residents. The sanctuary offered a place to breathe, to regroup, and to find encouragement from familiar traditions. Music, especially gospel, played a major role in strengthening spiritual life. Choirs filled buildings with powerful harmonies that reminded listeners of both struggle and resilience. These songs carried memories of the South while pointing toward a more hopeful future. Churches became training grounds for public speaking, leadership, and artistic development. Many musicians who later contributed to jazz and blues first found their confidence performing in church. The religious institutions of Harlem strengthened the moral foundation on which the Renaissance grew, making faith not just a personal practice, but a shared community resource. Churches played one of the most influential roles in shaping Harlem's social structure during the Renaissance. For many families who had migrated from the South, the church had long provided stability, guidance, and emotional strength. When they arrived in Harlem, they sought similar spaces where they could gather, worship, and rebuild a sense of community. Congregations grew quickly, and churches expanded their missions beyond Sunday services. They offered shelter, tutoring programs, charity drives, youth activities, and job placement assistance. Ministers became respected public figures whose voices carried weight in political debates and neighborhood decisions. Churches also provided emotional safety at a time when racial discrimination and economic hardship placed enormous pressure on residents. The sanctuary offered a place to breathe, to regroup, and to find encouragement from familiar traditions. Music, especially gospel, played a major role in strengthening spiritual life. Choirs filled buildings with powerful harmonies that reminded listeners of both struggle and resilience. These songs carried memories of the South while pointing toward a more hopeful future. Churches became training grounds for public speaking, leadership, and artistic development. Many musicians who later contributed to jazz and blues first found their confidence performing in church. The religious institutions of Harlem strengthened the moral foundation on which the Renaissance grew, making faith not just a personal practice, but a shared community resource. Harlem attracted a wide range of spiritual movements that reflected the diversity of its residents. Along with traditional denominations, such as Baptist and Methodist churches, the neighborhood became home to independent congregations that blended Christian practices with African traditions, Caribbean influences, and interpretations shaped by urban life. These movements appealed to migrants looking for a sense of belonging in a rapidly changing environment. Some groups emphasized mystical experiences or prophetic visions. Others promoted messages of racial pride, ethical responsibility, and personal transformation. Harlem's spiritual landscape encouraged dialogue between different beliefs. Even where groups disagreed, they recognized that faith served as a source of strength for people navigating new challenges. Sermons frequently addressed real concerns such as unemployment, discrimination, family stress, and the search for identity. Religious leaders believed that spiritual growth should translate into social action, urging members to participate in community service and local activism. Many women found leadership opportunities in these movements, serving as organizers, teachers, and group leaders. Their involvement expanded the influence of spiritual organizations and helped sustain their outreach programs. The growing variety of faith expressions made Harlem feel like a crossroads where old traditions met new interpretations. This mixture added richness to the Renaissance by giving artists and writers symbolic language rooted in spirituality, morality, and cultural history. As Harlem transformed into a bustling center of nightlife, creativity, and social experimentation, it also became a place where moral debates surfaced regularly. Churches and religious leaders expressed concern about the rapid expansion of clubs, gambling houses, and after-hours venues. They worried that constant entertainment and late-night culture would distract young people from education and long-term goals. At the same time, artists argued that expression, freedom, and exploration were essential parts of the Renaissance. These competing viewpoints shaped many conversations in the community. Ministers often preached about maintaining dignity and discipline, urging residents not to lose themselves in the temptations of city life. Their messages came from a genuine desire to protect families from exploitation or harmful behavior. Yet many residents believed that nightlife, music, and dance offered important outlets for stress and joy. The tension between restraint and expression became part of Harlem's identity. Families with different values negotiated these boundaries in their own ways. Some embraced the cultural excitement fully, while others kept a careful distance. Writers, musicians, and playwrights drew inspiration from these conflicts, portraying characters caught between tradition and modernity. These stories added emotional depth to the Renaissance, showing how people grappled with choices in a fast, moving world. The moral debates did not divide the community completely. Instead, they reflected Harlem's complexity and its search for balance in an era defined by change. The Harlem Renaissance could not have flourished without the growth of a publishing network that supported black writers and encouraged new voices to emerge. Before this period, most major publishing houses ignored African American literature unless it fit narrow stereotypes that appealed to white audiences. As literacy increased and more writers settled in Harlem, a demand grew for institutions willing to treat their work seriously. Black-owned presses, small printing companies, and community newspapers became crucial for nurturing local talent. These outlets allowed authors to publish poems, short stories, essays, and political commentary without worrying about censorship or editorial pressure to dilute their message. Publishers understood the importance of preserving authenticity, so they often encouraged writers to explore everyday struggles, spiritual traditions, humor, and the emotional depth of Black life. This support created a stable environment where new ideas could take root. Independent editors worked tirelessly to mentor young authors, help them refine their manuscripts, and connect them with audiences. Bookstores stocked works by Black authors, hosted readings, and created spaces where literature became a shared cultural experience. Writers, in turn, developed loyal readerships who eagerly followed their careers. The growth of these publishing institutions expanded the influence of the Renaissance, demonstrating that African American voices belonged on bookshelves and in national conversations. This shift challenged the publishing norms of the time and opened pathways for future generations. While the Renaissance produced remarkable literature, the financial realities facing authors were often difficult. Many writers earned little money from their published work, relying instead on teaching positions, journalism, or clerical jobs to make ends meet. Even those who gained recognition struggled to negotiate fair contracts with major publishing houses that hesitated to invest heavily in Black authors. Economic instability influenced the pace and direction of their creative output. Writers often balanced long work hours with late, night writing sessions, pushing themselves to remain active in literary circles despite fatigue. Grants, fellowships, and support from wealthy patrons helped some authors continue their work. Yet these opportunities were limited and sometimes came with expectations about subject matter or tone. Writers felt pressure to appeal to white audiences who were curious about Harlem's culture, but not always respectful of its deeper meaning. This dynamic created tension within the community. Some believed financial survival required adjusting their writing to fit the tastes of a broader market. Others insisted that authenticity mattered more than commercial success. The debate encouraged honest reflection about the relationship between art and economics. Many authors chose to write with unwavering conviction, even if it meant facing financial hardship. Their persistence added integrity to the Renaissance and emphasized that creativity was not simply a commodity, but a vital expression of identity and experience. Magazines became essential vehicles for spreading Renaissance literature across the country. Publications like Opportunity, The Crisis, Fire, and Negro World provided platforms for writers at every stage of their careers. They featured poetry, fiction, interviews, reviews, and commentary that reached thousands of readers. These magazines also hosted contests that rewarded young writers with publication opportunities and recognition. Winning such competitions helped launch the careers of several influential figures. Anthologies played an equally important role. Editors compiled collections that showcased the diversity of Black writing, allowing readers to encounter a wide range of voices in a single volume. These anthologies traveled beyond Harlem, reaching universities, libraries, and households throughout the United States. They helped shape the national perception of African American literature by presenting it as a coherent, powerful field worthy of serious study. The effect on readers was profound. People who had never visited Harlem learned about its dreams, struggles, and creative spirit through these printed pages. Literary events, book fairs, and public readings strengthened the connection between authors and audiences. These gatherings provided spaces where ideas could circulate freely and where writers could receive immediate feedback. The print culture of the Renaissance extended the movement's influence far beyond New York, proving that artistic expression could travel across geographic and social boundaries. By capturing the voices of the era, these publications helped secure the Renaissance's lasting legacy. Dance became one of the most visible expressions of Harlem's creativity during the Renaissance. The moment people stepped into a ballroom, they felt the pulse of the neighborhood through movement, rhythm, and shared excitement. The Savoy Ballroom was the heart of this scene. Its polished floors stretched across a massive space where dancers of all ages gathered nightly. The Savoy welcomed both black and white patrons, making it one of the rare integrated venues of the era. What distinguished the ballroom was not only its openness, but also the innovation happening on the dance floor. Young people created new moves inspired by jazz rhythms and the fast pace of city life. The Lindy Hop emerged from this environment, combining athletic jumps, smooth footwork, and improvisation. Skilled dancers became local celebrities, drawing crowds who came to watch them perform and challenge each other in spirited competitions. Music played by live big bands gave every night a sense of celebration, and the energy inside the Savoy helped define Harlem's unique cultural identity. Dance offered a joyful counterbalance to the hardships of daily life. It created a space where people felt free to express themselves, shake off stress, and connect with others. The rise of social dance demonstrated how deeply music and movement shaped the Renaissance, turning physical expression into a symbol of communal pride and creativity. Beyond the social dance floors, Harlem produced talented professional dancers who blended technique, storytelling, and cultural tradition into theatrical performances. Many trained in ballet, modern dance, or folk styles before bringing their skills to the stage. They performed in clubs, theaters, and touring shows that highlighted the depth of African American artistry. Dancers experimented with expressive gestures, narrative choreography, and dramatic themes that captured the emotional landscape of Black life. Some pieces addressed historical struggles, while others celebrated joy, resilience, and love. Choreographers created routines that incorporated African rhythms, Caribbean influences, and European forms, resulting in a fusion that felt entirely new. Their performances challenged audiences to reconsider what dance could communicate. While mainstream institutions often overlooked these artists, Harlem audiences understood the significance of their work. Stage performances became community events where spectators supported local talent and celebrated each breakthrough. Dancers also collaborated with musicians, poets, and visual artists, shaping multidisciplinary productions that expanded the boundaries of performance art. These partnerships encouraged creative risk, taking and helped dancers refine their technique and style. Many performers eventually gained recognition beyond Harlem, influencing dance trends across the country. Their commitment to excellence demonstrated that dance was not simply entertainment, but a sophisticated art form capable of expressing complex ideas and emotions. Harlem's dance culture extended beyond nightclubs and theaters into everyday life through schools and community programs. Dance instructors recognized that movement could build confidence, discipline, and social connection. They opened studios where children and teenagers learned steps ranging from jazz and tap to classical ballet. These programs offered more than physical training. They created an environment where young people discovered creative identity and developed a sense of belonging. Many families saw dance instruction as an opportunity for their children to grow into poised, expressive individuals who could navigate both the artistic and social demands of city life. Community organizations also sponsored free or low-cost classes so that children from low-income households could participate. Teachers emphasized respect, teamwork, and self-expression, shaping students who would later participate in Harlem's cultural world as performers or enthusiastic supporters. Dance instruction became a means of passing down cultural values and collective memory. Older styles mixed with newer influences, creating a vibrant, evolving tradition. Even those who did not pursue dance professionally carried its lessons with them. The confidence developed in a dance studio could translate into success in school, work, and social interactions. These programs helped sustain the Renaissance by ensuring that creativity remained accessible to all, not just the most talented or wealthy. Through the movement of bodies and the sharing of rhythm, Harlem nurtured a generation deeply connected to its cultural heritage. Harlem's dance culture extended beyond nightclubs and theaters into everyday life through schools and community programs. Dance instructors recognized that movement could build confidence, discipline, and social connection. They opened studios where children and teenagers learned steps, ranging from jazz and tap to classical ballet. These programs offered more than physical training. They created an environment where young people discovered creative identity and developed a sense of belonging. Many families saw dance instruction as an opportunity for their children to grow into poised, expressive individuals who could navigate both the artistic and social demands of city life. Community organizations also sponsored free or low-cost classes so that children from low-income households could participate. Teachers emphasized respect, teamwork, and self-expression, shaping students who would later participate in Harlem's cultural world as performers or enthusiastic supporters. Dance instruction became a means of passing down cultural values and collective memory. Older styles mixed with newer influences, creating a vibrant, evolving tradition. Even those who did not pursue dance professionally carried its lessons with them. The confidence developed in a dance studio could translate into success in school, work, and social interactions. These programs helped sustain the Renaissance by ensuring that creativity remained accessible to all, not just the most talented or wealthy. Through the movement of bodies and the sharing of rhythm, Harlem nurtured a generation deeply connected to its cultural heritage. Film was still a young medium during the Harlem Renaissance, yet quickly became a powerful tool for storytelling and representation. African American audiences were tired of seeing themselves portrayed through distortions and offensive caricatures in mainstream cinema. This frustration led a small circle of black filmmakers, writers, and producers to take control of their narrative. These pioneers faced enormous obstacles. Hollywood studios dominated the industry and refused to provide funding, equipment, or distribution channels for films that did not fit their commercial formulas. Despite this resistance, independent black filmmakers worked with determination, often raising money through churches, community clubs, or small investors. They rented equipment, borrowed locations, and taught themselves the technical skills needed to produce films with limited resources. Their stories explored family life, romance, heroism, and social conflict in ways that felt authentic to their communities. These productions demonstrated that African American audiences deserved films that respected their complexity and intelligence. Even though distribution was limited, the films created during this era became symbols of creative independence. They circulated in black, owned theaters, school auditoriums, and community halls, offering viewers a rare chance to see reflections of themselves on screen. These early filmmakers helped plant the seeds for a long tradition of black cinema, showing future generations that storytelling through film was not only possible, but necessary for cultural preservation. Photography gained extraordinary importance during the Harlem Renaissance because it served as both an art form and a historical record. Professional and amateur photographers captured daily life, documenting everything from church gatherings and street parades to family portraits and nightlife. Their images preserved the mood of the era and created a visual archive of a community experiencing profound transformation. Photographers understood that pictures could counteract racist imagery spread by newspapers and scientific publications. By presenting dignified, nuanced portraits of black individuals and families, they offered the country a more truthful and humanizing perspective. Portrait studios opened throughout Harlem, becoming places where people of all ages could present themselves with pride. These photos often marked milestones such as graduations, new jobs, or marriages. Beyond portraiture, photographers experimented with lighting, composition, and perspective to create artistic work that appeared in magazines and exhibitions. Some focused on capturing architectural scenes or the energy of crowded streets, while others took a more intimate approach, photographing musicians, dancers, and writers in their creative environments. Their images revealed the emotional layers of the Renaissance, showing moments of joy, introspection, community, and ambition. Photography also supported journalism and activism by providing evidence of social issues, such as overcrowded housing or discriminatory employment practices. Through both artistry and documentation, photography became a vital thread that held together the visual memory of Harlem. As film technology improved, newsreels and short performance films brought Harlem talent to wider audiences. Clubs and theaters occasionally allowed cameramen to record dancers, musicians, and comedians who performed for enthusiastic crowds. These clips reached viewers across the country, introducing them to jazz rhythms, dance styles, and personalities shaped by Harlem's cultural environment. Even though the recordings were brief, they carried enormous influence. They revealed a world that mainstream media rarely showed, one filled with artistry, sophistication, and originality. Newsreels also documented parades, political speeches, and public celebrations, giving Americans a window into Harlem's social and political life. These moving images helped bridge cultural gaps by allowing viewers to feel the energy and humanity of the community without relying solely on written descriptions. At the same time, appearing on film gave performers a chance to extend their reach far beyond the walls of local venues. A dancer who performed at the Savoy or a singer who debuted in a neighborhood club could suddenly be seen by audiences miles away. This exposure shifted careers, created new opportunities, and expanded the influence of the Renaissance. Film captured the spirit of Harlem in motion, preserving the gestures, expressions, and rhythms that defined the era. For a movement centered on creative expression, the camera became both a witness and a partner, helping to ensure that the legacy of Harlem's artists would outlive the moment itself. Nightlife shaped the identity of Harlem in ways that extended far beyond entertainment. The neighborhood's nightclubs became cultural laboratories where musicians, comedians, dancers, and singers honed their craft before passionate audiences. These venues varied widely in atmosphere. Some were elegant cabarets with polished floors, velvet curtains, and sharply dressed doormen, while others were modest rooms lit by a few bright bulbs. What they shared was their role as meeting points for people across class, profession, and background. Locals mingled with visitors from other boroughs, and even celebrities slipped quietly into booths to watch emerging talent. The clubs produced a kind of electricity that arose from improvisation, socializing, and collective joy. Musicians experimented with rhythms that would later define American music, and dancers responded with movement that pushed social dance into unexplored territory. Nightclubs also incubated trends in fashion, speech, and social etiquette. People arrived dressed in their best, hoping to project confidence and style. These rooms provided more than a night of music. They created a social system where friendships formed, opportunities appeared, and reputations were built. Performers who impressed nightclub audiences often found themselves invited to record sessions, theatrical roles, or touring ensembles. The energy inside Harlem's nightlife allowed the Renaissance to expand organically, fed by the excitement and creativity that pulsed through every evening performance. Beyond nightlife, Harlem was home to dozens of social clubs that gave residents a deep sense of community and belonging. These clubs ranged from small neighborhood groups to large organizations with formal memberships and structured activities. They hosted dinners, charity events, lectures, and debates, providing important social outlets for people adjusting to urban life. Many clubs centered around shared interests such as literature, business, or political activism. Members exchanged ideas, built professional networks, and supported one another's ambitions. Others focused on cultural heritage, linking residents with roots in the Caribbean, the American South, or various African traditions. These groups helped migrants navigate the challenges of relocation by offering emotional support, financial assistance, and practical guidance. They also became training grounds for leadership. Young professionals learned how to organize meetings, give speeches, and collaborate on community projects. Women took on major leadership roles within these clubs, influencing neighborhood initiatives and shaping public opinion. The sense of unity fostered by social clubs contributed to the cohesion that made Harlem resilient in the face of overcrowding, discrimination, and economic pressure. These organizations often intersected with artistic circles, inviting poets, musicians, and scholars to speak at gatherings. In doing so, they created bridges between cultural life and everyday community experience, strengthening the shared identity at the heart of the Renaissance. While performance venues and formal clubs shaped public culture, the everyday institutions of Harlem played an equally important role in nurturing community and creativity. Barbershops and beauty parlors became informal hubs where conversations flowed freely and no topic was off limits. Customers discussed politics, neighborhood news, job prospects, and artistic gossip while waiting for a haircut or styling appointment. These establishments were often small, family-run businesses that provided reliable income for owners who faced barriers in other professions. They also became safe, welcoming spaces where residents could relax and be themselves. Because these spaces were rooted in regular routines, they captured the rhythms of daily life better than any performance stage. Barbers and stylists knew their customers personally and often acted as informal counselors, offering encouragement and sharing knowledge about local resources. Their shops became bulletin boards where community announcements, event posters, and job listings were displayed. The relationships formed in these everyday spaces helped strengthen Harlem's social structure. Creative individuals often found inspiration in overheard conversations or spontaneous debates. Writers captured the humor and honesty of barbershop dialogue in their stories. Musicians picked up rhythms and slang that later appeared in their lyrics. The simple act of gathering for a haircut or styling appointment became part of a larger cultural exchange that shaped the tone and language of the Renaissance. These everyday institutions prove that culture was not created only on stages or in salons, but also in the familiar, intimate spaces where people live their daily lives. The Harlem Renaissance was not only a burst of creativity, but also a period of intense intellectual debate about what black art should represent. Writers, scholars, and community leaders often found themselves struggling to define the purpose of artistic expression. Some argued that art should serve a social mission, uplifting the race, disproving racist assumptions, and presenting African Americans as refined, educated, and morally strong. This perspective had deep roots in earlier political movements that emphasized respectability as a strategy for survival in a hostile society. Advocates believed that every poem, painting, or song had the potential to shape public perception. Others, many of them younger artists, insisted that art should be an honest reflection of life in all its complexity, without being constrained by moral expectations or fear of criticism. They believed that portraying real struggles, humor, flaws, and even uncomfortable truths was essential for creative freedom. These competing viewpoints sparked spirited conversations in cafes, apartments, libraries, and editorial offices. Writers debated whether art should prioritize political responsibility or personal authenticity. Musicians questioned whether innovation might conflict with tradition. Painters wondered how much to incorporate African influence versus modernist techniques. The debates did not fracture the Renaissance. Instead, they energized it. They forced artists to think critically about their choices and develop stronger artistic identities. These philosophical discussions helped the movement grow beyond simple celebration and evolve into a mature, intellectual force that shaped cultural identity for generations. Two towering intellectual figures shaped the philosophical direction of the Harlem Renaissance: W.E.B. Du Bois and Alain Locke. Both were brilliant scholars, but they approached the question of black identity from different angles. Du Bois viewed art as a strategic tool in the struggle for civil rights. He believed literature and music should uplift African Americans by emphasizing dignity, discipline, and strength. His long career in activism informed his perspective. Du Bois feared that depictions of poverty, nightlife, or internal conflict might reinforce racist stereotypes rather than challenge them. Though he admired creativity, he wanted art to work in service of justice. Alain Locke embraced a broader, more liberal approach. Often called the dean of the Harlem Renaissance, Locke argued that the movement should encourage artistic independence and experimentation. He believed cultural expression could redefine identity not by hiding struggle, but by embracing the richness of African heritage and the modern experiences of urban life. Locke introduced the concept of the new Negro, a confident, intellectually engaged figure who rejected outdated limitations. His writing encouraged artists to look inward for inspiration rather than letting white expectations dictate their work. Du Bois and Locke did not always agree, but their dialogue shaped the intellectual backbone of the Renaissance. Their contrasting ideas invited artists to consider their motivations and responsibilities, pushing them to think deeply about what it meant to create during a moment of social transformation. As the Harlem Renaissance matured, thinkers began exploring identity through a global lens. Harlem was filled with migrants from the American South, but it also attracted people from the Caribbean, Latin America, and Africa. This diversity created a unique environment where discussions of belonging expanded beyond national borders. Writers and scholars explored connections between African Americans and the African diaspora, examining how shared histories of colonialism, slavery, and cultural adaptation shaped identity. Caribbean intellectuals brought new perspectives on language, resistance, and independence movements. African students studying in the United States engaged in conversations about tradition, political freedom, and modernity. These global influences encouraged Harlem residents to see themselves not just as a minority within America, but as part of a worldwide network of people fighting for dignity and self-determination. This shift reshaped philosophical debates. Artists questioned what it meant to reclaim African heritage in a modern context. They explored whether identity could be rooted in both ancestral memory and contemporary urban experience. These questions fueled new forms of expression in literature, visual art, and music. The idea of diaspora forged emotional bonds among people who shared cultural similarities despite living in different parts of the world. It also encouraged solidarity and political awareness. By engaging with global perspectives, Harlem expanded the scope of the Renaissance, transforming it from a local cultural movement into an intellectual force with international resonance. This global dimension helped future generations connect Black art, identity, and philosophy across continents. Economic life in Harlem during the Renaissance was shaped by the determination of residents to build institutions they could trust and control. Many migrants had left the South after years of limited economic opportunity and workplace exploitation. So creating Black-owned businesses became a way to secure stability and dignity. Harlem's main avenues gradually filled with barbershops, cafes, pharmacies, tailoring shops, funeral homes, music stores, and small groceries. These establishments served as both economic engines and social anchors. Business owners took pride in offering services specifically tailored to the needs of their community. Customers appreciated having places where they were treated with respect, a luxury not always available in white-owned establishments. As businesses prospered, owners reinvested in the neighborhood by hiring local employees and sponsoring youth programs, church events, and cultural gatherings. The economic growth created a sense of ownership among residents who saw Harlem not just as a place they lived in, but as a place they were actively shaping. Business success also helped shift perceptions. Newspapers highlighted entrepreneurs as models of discipline, ambition, and leadership. Their achievements countered false narratives about African American incapacity and became sources of community pride. Although many businesses faced challenges such as high rent, competition, and discriminatory banking practices, they continued to push forward. They stood as proof that economic independence was possible, even in a society that placed obstacles at every turn. This entrepreneurial spirit laid the groundwork for future generations who would build on the foundation established during the Renaissance. One of the most difficult barriers Harlem residents faced was gaining access to fair banking and investment opportunities. Mainstream financial institutions frequently refused loans to Black entrepreneurs or charged predatory interest rates that made repayment nearly impossible. This discrimination limited the expansion of businesses and forced many promising ventures to close prematurely. In response, community leaders worked to establish financial institutions dedicated to serving African American customers. These banks and savings associations aim to provide safer alternatives for deposits, mortgages, and small business loans. Although they operated with fewer resources than larger institutions, they offered a level of trust and understanding that mainstream banks lacked. Residents gathered at community meetings to learn about budgeting, credit, and long-term planning. Financial education became a quiet yet powerful form of empowerment. Investment clubs also emerged, allowing neighbors to pool money and support one another's ventures. These joint efforts helped families purchase homes, open shops, or pay for their children's schooling. The process was slow and often precarious, but it demonstrated a deep belief in collective progress. Harlem's economic challenges remained immense, yet the determination to build a financial infrastructure showed a mature commitment to self-reliance. As the Renaissance unfolded, financial access shaped both personal fortunes and community development. Although discrimination persisted, the fight for fair banking became one of the most important but least celebrated battlegrounds of the era. It revealed the practical side of the Renaissance, where dreams required not only creativity but also strategic planning and economic resilience. Economic life in Harlem was filled with contradictions. On one hand, the neighborhood displayed signs of growth through thriving nightlife, bustling storefronts, and the pride of self-made entrepreneurs. On the other hand, deep inequality shaped the daily experiences of many residents. Even those who found work often earned far less than their white counterparts. Factories rarely promoted black workers to supervisory roles, and unions remained selective, leaving many laborers without protections or leverage. Domestic workers faced long hours, irregular pay, and little job security. These realities created constant pressure on families who struggled to balance hope with hardship. Economic aspiration sometimes produced tension within the community. Those who achieved financial stability were admired, but they were also expected to contribute generously to neighborhood causes, church projects, and charitable programs. Younger migrants, seeing the glamour of Harlem's nightclubs and fine clothing, sometimes overestimated the wealth circulating in the neighborhood and placed strain on themselves to keep up. Business owners also felt stress as they navigated the high costs of rent and supplies, while trying to remain affordable for local residents. Yet despite all these challenges, Harlem maintained a remarkable spirit of perseverance. Economic struggle became part of a narrative that fueled artistic expression. Writers described the tension between ambition and systemic barriers. Musicians captured the frustration and triumph of daily survival in their rhythms. The clash between aspiration and inequality shaped the emotional depth of the Renaissance, reminding everyone that creativity thrived not in comfort, but in determination. Through their persistence, Harlem residents demonstrated that economic hardship could slow progress, but never extinguish it. When migrants arrived in Harlem, many believed the North would offer the freedom and equality they had been denied in the South. They hoped for safer streets, fairer job opportunities, and a chance to live without constant fear. Yet they soon discovered that the North had its own forms of discrimination. Racial boundaries were not written in a law as clearly as in southern states, but they shaped daily life in powerful ways. Restaurants, hotels, and theaters often practiced unofficial exclusion. Schools were not legally segregated. Yet neighborhood zoning meant that black children were usually confined to overcrowded, underfunded buildings. Employment discrimination was widespread, blocking advancement and forcing many workers into low-paying roles regardless of their skills. Social spaces followed similar patterns. Some nightclubs welcomed diverse crowds, while others enforced strict racial separation. Even universities with progressive reputations admitted only a small number of black students each year. These invisible yet pervasive restrictions created a sense of frustration for migrants who had imagined a new beginning. Despite this, Harlem became a stronghold of resilience. Residents learned to navigate the contradictions of a society that promised freedom publicly while limiting it privately. These tensions fueled political activism and shaped artistic expression. Writers questioned the notion of American equality. Musicians expressed the bittersweet experience of hope colliding with reality. The ongoing struggle against Northern discrimination became one of the defining undercurrents of the Harlem Renaissance. reminding everyone that cultural brilliance emerged in the face of ongoing barriers rather than in their absence. The shadow of the 1919 Red Summer lingered over the early years of the Harlem Renaissance. Across the United States, dozens of cities experienced violent attacks on black neighborhoods. Although Harlem itself did not see the worst of the violence, migrants carried the memories and traumas of those events with them. Many had fled towns where families were forced to defend their homes or escape under threat of lynching. These experiences shaped their attitudes towards safety, solidarity, and political engagement. Community organizations in Harlem discussed strategies to prevent similar violence. Churches and civic groups encouraged residents to stay informed about national politics, to vote, and to participate in local defense committees. Newspapers reported incidents of racial conflict with urgency, reminding readers that freedom required vigilance. This climate strengthened ties within Harlem, where residents felt an acute need to protect one another. The idea of community defense was not only physical, it extended to economic advocacy, housing rights, and legal support. People understood that survival depended on unity. Activists organized rallies, wrote petitions, and pressured government officials to investigate incidents of brutality. The memory of Red Summer became part of the cultural consciousness that shaped the Renaissance. Writers expressed the emotional aftermath of violence through poetry and fiction. Musicians conveyed its tension in blues melodies that carried both sorrow and determination. The trauma of the era did not silence Harlem. Instead, it inspired the community to speak louder, plan smarter, and demand justice with sharper clarity. Beyond major events, African Americans in Harlem dealt daily with smaller but relentless forms of prejudice that shaped their emotional and psychological well-being. These subtle insults, sometimes disguised as politeness or curiosity, reminded them that even in the North, equality remained conditional. Black professionals faced skepticism from clients or colleagues who questioned their competence. Students encountered teachers who praised them in ways that carried quiet condescension. Shoppers were followed in department stores or ignored altogether. Tenants seeking repairs were treated dismissively by landlords who believed they could take advantage of overcrowded conditions. These experiences added layers of stress to lives already marked by financial challenges and social pressures. Many residents learned to navigate these encounters with resilience, humor, or strategic patience, but the emotional cost accumulated over time. Families discussed these issues privately, helping one another interpret and cope with unfair treatment. Artists captured these moments in their work, using literature, theater, and visual art to reveal how prejudice operated beneath the surface of daily interactions. By giving voice to these experiences, they challenged the myth that racism was solely a Southern problem. The psychological toll of microaggressions shaped identity formation and influenced political awareness. It encouraged people to seek community in Harlem, where they could find understanding and affirmation. The Renaissance thrived partly because residents refused to allow these constant indignities to define them. Instead, they transformed the pain into creative expression and collective resolve, proving that dignity could survive even when society failed to honor it. The shift from rural Southern communities to the fast pace of Harlem reshaped family structures in ways that were both liberating and challenging. In the South, families often lived close to extended relatives who shared responsibilities such as childcare, cooking, and emotional support. Once migrants reached Harlem, those networks became harder to maintain. Relatives were scattered across different northern cities, and households were typically smaller, with only parents and children living together. This new structure placed more pressure on couples to balance long work hours with the needs of their families. Many parents worked multiple jobs or had schedules that kept them away for long stretches. Children often walked themselves to school or spent afternoons in the care of neighbors. At the same time, the city environment offered opportunities that rural life could not. Families were exposed to libraries, museums, public lectures, and a wider variety of educational programs. Children encountered new ideas and cultures every day, which expanded their sense of identity. The community's vibrancy meant young people grew up surrounded by music, poetry, dance, and political conversations. Yet these benefits came with pressures that tested family bonds. Parents sometimes worried that their children were being influenced too quickly by the nightlife and freedom of the streets. Teens adopted new fashions, slang, and attitudes that clashed with the conservative values their parents carried from the South. These generational tensions were common in Harlem households. Even so, families adapted, finding ways to compromise and communicate across their different experiences. Their resilience helped sustain the Renaissance, proving that cultural transformation was not only happening in theaters or lecture halls, but also around kitchen tables and in crowded living rooms where families negotiated the meaning of change. Urban life opened new possibilities for women while simultaneously raising complex questions about independence, respectability, and identity. In the South, social norms had often confined women to domestic roles or agricultural labor. Harlem offered more job opportunities, though many were still low-paying positions in laundry work, food service, or domestic labor. Despite these limits, the city gave women greater exposure to education, political activism, artistic circles, and social clubs. Many women became community organizers, teachers, journalists, or small business owners, reshaping the way society viewed their capabilities. These changes sparked conversations about gender expectations. Some men felt uneasy seeing women take on greater public roles or spending evenings in clubs that symbolized metropolitan freedom. Women, however, argued that they deserved the same opportunities for self-expression and economic independence that men enjoyed. Their participation in artistic and political movements challenged outdated beliefs and broadened the definition of womanhood within the community. Younger women, especially those who grew up in Harlem, embraced modern fashion, short hairstyles, and assertive attitudes that reflected the spirit of the age. These choices sometimes triggered criticism from older generations who worried about preserving cultural values. Such debates appeared in literature, theater, and poetry, where writers explored women's struggles to balance independence with social expectations. Harlem's evolving attitudes toward gender were not uniform, but they represented a major shift in the cultural landscape. Women carved space for themselves in the Renaissance, shaping the movement with perspectives that widened its emotional and intellectual range. Their contributions prove that the development of Harlem's cultural identity depended not only on male leaders or celebrated artists, but also on the countless women who insisted on being heard. Relationships in Harlem reflected the broader changes happening in the community. The move to the north disrupted traditional courtship practices, which in the South had often been shaped by close-knit social circles and parental involvement. In Harlem, young adults had more anonymity, more independence, and more choices. Dance halls, cafes, reading groups, and nightclubs created spaces where people could meet outside the supervision of family or church. These new social environments offered opportunities for romance, but also introduced challenges. Economic instability placed strain on marriages. Partners often worked long hours or opposing shifts, leaving little time to build intimacy. Living in crowded apartments with limited privacy also affected relationships, especially for newly married couples trying to adjust to city life. Men and women had to redefine their expectations of partnership. Women who worked outside the home contributed significantly to household income, shifting gender dynamics that had been shaped by Southern traditions. Some men embraced this change, while others felt pressured by the new balance of financial responsibility. Social life in Harlem encouraged experimentation, and relationships sometimes reflected that fluidity. Couples navigated questions about loyalty, independence, and personal ambition in ways that previous generations had not encountered. Writers captured these emotional struggles in poems, plays, and novels that explored jealousy, desire, heartbreak, and the longing for stability. These stories resonated deeply because they reflected real dilemmas faced by residents trying to build meaningful bonds in a rapidly changing world. Despite the difficulties, partnerships in Harlem often displayed resilience. Couples supported one another through economic hardship, discrimination, and the pressures of urban living. Their determination to build families and maintain connection became one of the quiet strengths holding the community together during years of cultural transformation. By the late 1920s, Harlem had become more than a neighborhood or even a cultural movement. It had grown into an international symbol, recognized far beyond the borders of the United States. People around the world began to see Harlem as a place where African-descended communities were redefining themselves with confidence and imagination. Scholars in Europe wrote about the Renaissance as a groundbreaking shift in modern art and literature. Newspapers in the Caribbean followed Harlem's developments closely, highlighting the achievements of musicians, poets, and political thinkers. African students studying abroad often spoke of Harlem with admiration, regarding it as a center of empowerment that reflected their own anti-colonial aspirations. The neighborhood became a destination for travelers who wanted to witness its vibrant nightlife and artistic energy firsthand. Even those who never visited formed an emotional connection through books, records, and photographs that circulated globally. Harlem's influence stretched across oceans because the movement spoke to universal themes: the search for dignity, the need for representation, and the determination to shape one's own identity. While cultural exchange was not always equal or uncomplicated, it created networks of inspiration that linked Black communities worldwide. Harlem showed that creativity could become a form of diplomacy, bridging distances between people who shared similar histories and dreams. Its impact demonstrated that liberation was not only a political struggle, but also a cultural one, rooted in storytelling, performance, and the assertion of selfhood on a global stage. Harlem's international relationships were particularly strong within the African diaspora. Caribbean migrants contributed significantly to the intellectual and artistic life of the Renaissance. They brought traditions of political debate, literary experimentation, and cultural pride that blended seamlessly with the perspectives of African American residents. Figures from Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, and other islands formed organizations that celebrated Caribbean heritage, examined colonial politics, and promoted solidarity. Their presence enriched Harlem's diversity and widened the scope of conversation. Writers exchanged folk tales, linguistic patterns, and historical insights that shaped a more global understanding of Black identity. Meanwhile, African activists and students, many involved in early independence movements, visited Harlem to engage in discussions about liberation, cultural preservation, and the future of their home countries. These dialogues introduced Renaissance artists to new interpretations of African history, aesthetics, and philosophy. The result was a powerful blend of experiences that helped create a more comprehensive sense of belonging. one that connected Harlem not just to the United States, but to the entire Black Atlantic world. This exchange encouraged artists to incorporate African motifs, Caribbean rhythms, and diasporic narratives into their work. It also inspired political thinkers to align their struggles with global movements for freedom. Harlem became a meeting place where diaspora communities learned from each other, expanded their perspectives, and laid the groundwork for the Pan-African and anti-colonial revolutions that would gain strength in the decades to come. Before the Harlem Renaissance, much of the world understood Black culture only through distorted images shaped by racism, colonialism, and misinformation. The Renaissance challenged these narratives by offering an alternative, a vision of Black life filled with intelligence, artistic mastery, humor, complexity, and emotional depth. As Harlem artists gained international exposure, audiences abroad began to rethink long-held assumptions. Jazz musicians touring Europe astonished listeners with their skill and originality. Their performances captivated crowds who had never experienced music so dynamic, improvisational, and deeply expressive. Writers whose books circulated overseas introduced global readers to the nuances of Black life, portraying characters with dignity and agency. Visual artists exhibited work that showcased African aesthetics through a modern lens, expanding international art dialogues. Even photographs of Harlem's stylish residents, busy streets, and electrifying dance halls shaped new perceptions by presenting a vibrant, modern community. These cultural exports allowed people across the world to see African-descended individuals not as stereotypes, but as creators of influential art forms. Harlem's global reach also encouraged foreign artists to adopt jazz rhythms, poetic structures, and philosophical themes inspired by the Renaissance. In this way, the movement reshaped global culture while simultaneously strengthening pride within the diaspora. Harlem showed that creativity could serve as a form of power, capable of altering imaginations, breaking barriers, and forging new pathways of understanding. Its international resonance proved that a neighborhood barely 3 square miles wide could influence continents, inspire movements, and permanently shift the world's view of Black identity. The Harlem Renaissance thrived during a period of relative economic growth, but the Great Depression of the 1930s created pressures that the movement could not withstand. As industries collapsed and unemployment skyrocketed across the nation, Harlem felt the impact with particular severity. Many residents lost the jobs that had supported their families, and businesses that once formed the backbone of the community struggled to stay open. Nightclubs reduced their hours or shut down entirely. Theaters, galleries, and publishers found it harder to invest in new talent, leaving artists with fewer opportunities to showcase their work. Rent continued to rise despite the economic collapse, pushing families into deeper financial strain. Some residents moved away in search of work elsewhere, while others remained but shifted their priorities toward survival rather than artistic experimentation. The vibrant energy that had fueled the Renaissance dimmed as people focused on feeding their families, securing shelter, and supporting neighbors. Yet even as the movement slowed, it did not disappear. The foundation built during the prosperous years allowed cultural expression to continue in smaller, quieter forms. Musicians played in reduced venues. Writers turned to journalism or government-sponsored arts programs. Community organizations worked to preserve the spirit of collaboration that had defined the era. The Depression revealed that the Renaissance, though weakened, had planted cultural seeds too deep to be erased by economic hardship. It marked a moment of transition rather than an ending, showing how creativity could survive even in the harshest circumstances. As the Depression reshaped America, new artistic movements emerged that drew from Harlem's achievements while moving in different directions. Some writers and intellectuals began to focus on social realism, using art to expose the harsh economic conditions that affected working-class communities. Others turned toward political organizations that aligned cultural production with activism, joining socialist, labor, or anti-colonial groups that gained momentum during the 1930s. These shifts reflected a growing belief that art should address systemic issues more directly. Younger artists who had grown up during the Renaissance developed their own styles, influenced by modernism, global politics, and technological change. Meanwhile, jazz evolved rapidly, moving into swing, big band, and eventually bebop, styles that carried traces of Harlem's improvisational spirit, but followed new musical philosophies. Many Renaissance figures continued contributing to American culture even after the movement's peak. Langston Hughes remained a prominent voice for decades. Zora Neale Hurston produced groundbreaking work that later generations rediscovered and celebrated. Visual artists, dancers, and musicians passed on their knowledge through teaching or mentorship, shaping the next wave of Black creatives. The Renaissance also inspired cultural movements in other cities, including Chicago, Detroit, and Los Angeles, proving that its influence radiated outward rather than fading. Even as artistic styles changed, Harlem's insistence on authentic representation and cultural pride became a permanent part of American artistic identity. The movement encouraged future generations to view creativity as a tool for both personal expression and collective transformation. The legacy of the Harlem Renaissance lives on in virtually every corner of modern culture. It influenced the civil rights movement by demonstrating the power of collective identity, intellectual debate, and creative expression. It shaped the ways universities study literature, music, and history, proving that African American voices belong at the center of academic inquiry. Artists across genres, from jazz musicians and spoken word poets to filmmakers and fashion designers, continue to draw inspiration from the era's bold experimentation and cultural pride. The Renaissance also redefined how the world views Black identity. It showed that African American culture was not a marginal or secondary tradition, but a major force capable of reshaping national and global imagination. Its emphasis on authenticity, self-definition, and diaspora consciousness helped build frameworks still used today in discussions of race, creativity, and social justice. Harlem itself remains a cultural landmark. Visitors walk the same streets that once echoed with jazz riffs, footsteps of dancers, and the murmurs of poets drafting their newest lines. Murals, memorials, and preserved buildings honor the achievements of those who transformed the neighborhood into a beacon of expression. Scholars continue uncovering overlooked figures whose work adds depth to the Renaissance narrative. Modern movements celebrating Black art, from Afrofuturism to contemporary spoken word festivals, carry forward the same spirit of innovation and confidence. The Renaissance may have peaked nearly a century ago, but its influence endures because it reshaped not only a moment in history, but the very framework through which people imagine possibility. It proved that creativity can alter the course of culture, empower communities, and leave a legacy that expands far beyond its original time and place. You've just traveled through the full journey of the Harlem Renaissance, a movement that blended struggle, ambition, talent, and hope into one unforgettable moment in history. Today you heard how a community built a cultural powerhouse out of almost nothing, how musicians and poets shaped global imagination, how families adapted to new lives, and how political and social debates pushed people to rethink identity. You followed the rise of artists who refused to be defined by limits, the challenges brought by discrimination and economic hardship, and a legacy that still inspires new creators around the world. The heart of this story is clear. Even in difficult times, communities can build something extraordinary when they combine courage with creativity. The Harlem Renaissance reminds us that art is more than entertainment. It is a form of power, a path to dignity, and a way for people to declare who they are and who they refuse to become. That is the moral of today's journey. If this history moved you, inspired you, or made you curious about the world behind the headlines, then come back to History Teller YT for more. There are countless stories waiting, stories of resilience, innovation, and the people who shaped the world we know. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and I'll see you again on the next journey.